This is Tony Victor, and I'm doing a reading from G.I. Gurdjieff's In Search of Being.
Identification. A fundamental characteristic of our attitude toward ourselves and our surroundings is our constant identification, our tendency to meld with whatever has caught our attention, desire, or imagination at a given moment. Identification is so pervasive that for purposes of observation, it is difficult to separate it from everything else. We are always identifying. The only thing that changes is the object of our identification. We identify with a minor challenge that confronts us while completely forgetting the original goal we had set out to accomplish. We identify with a single thought and forget other thoughts, or with a single emotion or mood and forget our broader emotions and moods. This occurs all the time in work on oneself. We become so identified with individual aims that we fail to see the wood for the trees. 2 or 3 trees closest to us represent the whole forest. Identifying is one of our most insidious foes because it penetrates everywhere and fools us just when we think we are struggling against it. To free oneself from identifying is especially difficult because we naturally become more easily identified with things that interest us most, those to which we give our time, effort, and attention. The only way to free oneself from identifying is to be constantly on guard and merciless with oneself, that is, ready to see without fear all the subtle and hidden forms that identifying can assume. It is necessary to pursue the study of identifying to its very roots in oneself. Part of what makes struggling with it so difficult is that we tend to see it as a positive trait. We call it enthusiasm, passion, inspiration, or whatever, and we think that only in this state we can produce good work of any kind. In reality, of course, this is an illusion. In fact, identifying actually prevents us from doing anything the least bit sensible. We would immediately change this positive view if we truly understood that this state means. It makes a person into a thing, a piece of flesh. It deprives him of even the small semblance of a human being that he has. In the East, where people smoke hashish and other drugs, it is not uncommon for a man to become so identified with his pipe that he begins to consider he is a pipe himself. This is not a joke, but a fact. In the sense of himself, he actually becomes a pipe. This is what identifying is, and for this, hashish or opium is entirely unnecessary. Look at how people are in shops, theaters, and restaurants, or how they identify with words when they argue or try to prove something, especially when they do not really know what they are talking about. They become greediness or desires, or they become words until nothing of themselves is left. Identifying is a chief obstacle to self-remembering because a person who is identified is unable to remember himself. The first step in self-remembering is not to identify, but in order to do this, one has first to stop identifying with oneself, stop calling oneself I all the time. We have to keep in mind that there are two in us. There is oneself, that is, I in us, and there is another person, whom we must struggle with and overcome if we wish to attain anything. So long as we identify or are susceptible to being identified, we are the slave of everything that happens to us. Freedom means, first and foremost, freedom from identification. After general forms of identification, we have to study a particular kind, namely identifying with people, which takes the form of considering them. That is, reckoning with them, taking them into account. There are several different kinds of considering. The most prevalent is considering what others think about us, how they treat us, what kind of attitude they seem to have toward us. We always worry that people do not appreciate us, are not sufficiently nice and polite with us. All this torments us, makes us think and suspect. We waste an enormous amount of energy on supposing or guessing and develop a distrustful and hostile attitude towards others. Petty concerns like how somebody might have looked at us, what he might have thought or said of us, acquire for us an immense significance. All this considering is merely a form of identification and is wholly based upon our inner demands, our requirements. We each inwardly require that everyone see what a remarkable person we are, and that they constantly express their respect, esteem, and admiration for us, for our intellect, cleverness, originality, appearance, and all our other qualities. These requirements are in turn based on a completely fanciful notion about ourselves, such as often occurs with people of modest ability or appearance. Writers, actors, musicians, artists, and politicians, for instance, are almost without exception sick people. And what are they suffering from? First, from an inflated opinion of themselves, then from requirements, and then from considering. That is, being ready and prepared beforehand to take offense at the slightest lack of understanding or appreciation they perceive in other people. So far, we have been speaking about the internal considering, that is, identifying with others. The opposite of this is external considering, which can also serve as a means of fighting against it. External considering is based on an entirely different attitude toward people that involves adapting oneself to the requirements and weaknesses. By considering externally, we do what makes life easier for ourselves and for others. External considering requires both a definite knowledge of people, of their tastes, habits, and prejudices, as well as a high degree of self-control. We often sincerely desire to tell someone what they really think or feel about him. If we are weak, we give in and justify any unpleasant consequences, saying that we did not want to lie or to pretend or that we wanted to be honest. Then we convince ourselves that the whole thing was the other person's fault and we actually wanted to consider him, even not quarrel and let him have his way. But the other person did not want to consider us, which made it impossible to deal with him. This is a common human tendency, to begin with the blessing and end with the curse. We start by deciding not to consider and end up blaming others for not considering us. This is an example of how external considering passes into internal considering. But if we remember ourselves, we will also remember that other people are machines just like us. And we will enter into their position, put ourselves in their place, and be more able to understand and feel what others think and feel. If we can do this, our relations will become easier. Right external considering is an important part of our work. It is not uncommon for people to understand perfectly well the need for external considering in their lives, while at the same time neglecting it in the work with others. We assume that because we are in this work, we have a right not to consider. As a matter of fact, the opposite is true. In this work, that is, for a person's successful work, 10 times more external considering is necessary than in life. This is because only by external considering can we show our valuation and understanding of this work, which in turn determines the results that are obtained. Thank you for listening. Please check out my project page on KundaliniQuicksilver.com. Click on the gray bar at the very top and it'll take you right there. Also, please go ahead and subscribe to my TikTok, Kundalini Quicksilver, also my Instagram and YouTube at Quicksilver Astrology. Thank you.